Welcome to this episode of Intellectual Catholicism. Today, I'm here with one of my classmates at Harvard Divinity School, Pius. You go by the nickname Pius. I want to know where that nickname came from. But your Korean name, help me pronounce that. How do I pronounce that properly?
Seyun.
Seyun. Okay. And then last name is just Joung, or
Yes, that's right.
all right. So, Pius, let's begin by first just knowing a little bit about where that nickname come from, and then I'll get into some of the other details about you.
Well, it's a baptismal name. So
Mhm.
my in principle, your godparents, of course, would give you a baptismal name back in the day.
Mm.
In Korea, that custom has sort of stuck because all of our names are based on Confucian ideas, and we are given a new name at baptism, just as in many English-speaking countries, you're given a confirmation name.
Mm.
Instead of having a confirmation name, in Korea, we have the custom of giving a baptismal name. But because I also lived in the Anglosphere during my confirmation preparations, I've also got a confirmation saint. So I get the best of both worlds in many
Mhm.
ways and have a devotion to two very excellent saints.
And
Um,
which Pius is it?
so Pius was after Pope Saint Pius X.
Okay.
Um, close to my birthday is his feast day, both in the old and the new calendars. September 3rd in the old calendar, and August 21st in the new calendar. So I get, if you like, during those 2 weeks, I get to celebrate two feast days and a birthday.
That's awesome. Well, for those of you who are wondering, why do I have Seyun on my channel or Pius on my channel today? I wanted to just read off a little bit about him. So this is actually on the Frank Knox Memorial Fellowship website at Harvard. And so I'm just going to read off his credentials very
Oh, you're
quickly.
going to
So,
embarrass me.
so it says throughout his schooling across four continents, Seyun hopes to dedicate his life to promote the timeless wisdom gained through close reading of texts from late antiquity in their historical context. Continuing his undergraduate appreciation for biblical texts. By the way, his undergraduate studies was at the University of Oxford, so he's heavy hitting from the start. His appreciation for biblical texts from the Second Temple, as well as early Christian documents. He hopes to promote an awareness of the living tradition embodied in the Jewish and Christian traditions in the vibrant, dynamic Mediterranean of late antiquity. And so it just lists out here that he's interested in Second Temple traditions, early Christian exegesis of the Hebrew Bible, and particularly in that period of the Latin West before Augustine. And then I believe it mentions that you also are doing research into, well, I think on the other website, on Oxford's website, it mentions that you're interested in Cyprian of Carthage and Maximus the Confessor. So we have a full plate of things to talk about. And so let me just start with something light. All right, Pius, where did your accent come from?
Oh, this is a very personal question for me because it's one of these things where I at first didn't really consciously think about it. I grew up in Australia for most of my childhood. I can remember even like seeing kangaroos hopping through my backyard. This is how great it was. It was in Adelaide, which is a fairly smallish city in any other terms, big city for Australian terms. We had koalas living and so on and so forth. So I had a very distinctly like, sort of Aussie accent when I
Mm,
was growing up there. Um, and then we moved to Norway, and I started learning some Norwegian, started like gaining some more of this European sort of accent. And then when I moved back to Korea, my parents moved and I went to a Protestant mission school, an American school actually, and
mm,
and and so everyone found my accent to be very odd, odd there. Everyone else had a very American accent, and I was the lone one out, and I think I reacted sort of sharply to that in
mm,
many ways. And then when I moved to Oxford again, it sort of shifted, and I'm sure it shifts having been here at Harvard for a little bit as well. I noticed the other day that I say Notre Dame rather than Notre Dame, referring to the university.
mhm.
Um, and that's got to be some sort of Americanism that's crept in. So I think that the accent is representative of my identity, as it is for a lot of as it is for a lot of people
Hmm.
as well. I actually did, when I was a little younger, a TEDx video precisely on this topic, which I'm sure you'll be able to find as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I know growing up personally as well, it's funny because I used to think I didn't have an accent. And then as time has passed, I realized that, wow, I have a kind of a Midwestern twang. Like it'll come out, so I don't know, you can probably hear it, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
very different even from the East Coast or the Boston or the New
Right.
Yorker accent as well. And there's a difference, I think, between sort of the older school that have the sort of I think they say like coffee, like
Yeah.
Senator Bernie Sanders, quite quintessentially, but others in that generation as well. Whereas in our generation, I feel like it's becoming more homogenized, if that's a fair
Mhm.
assessment. I don't know.
So, kind of just moving on then from a little bit about your origin story, right? You talked about Australia and then your time in Norway. Uh, talking now about your faith, who have been some of the biggest influences in your journey?
It's shifted from time to time, I
Mm,
think. At a certain stage in my life, I have a very big devotion. I still do have a very big devotion, I should say, to Saint Therese of Lisieux, the Little
mhm,
Flower. Um, her sort of more devotional side, I mean, it's often denied. Her title, as little, is misleading because it often gives the impression that she's not a real mystic, or she's just some sort of sheltered Carmelite in the middle of in the north of France somewhere. But she, of course, is the patron saint of missions.
mhm,
And has this great role also in governing my life. Reading Story of a Soul on that plane trip actually from Australia, from Adelaide to Trondheim in Norway, I quite providentially had a copy of Story of a Soul in my hands, and that in many ways shifted how I live my life
mhm,
and my own faith activities as well. And so I have a big devotion to the Carmelite tradition. Um, uh, Throughout my theological studies, though, I feel like St. John Henry Newman has been
mhm,
the greatest guiding light. Also an Oriel man, and so I felt sort of shadows of him throughout my time. Of course, the great chapel at Oriel has this little oratory. It's sort of hidden from view, but it's this little place where Newman would go and pray.
mhm,
And it was a great privilege to be able to go and pray. Often I'd pray the office there or pray the rosary, and just to feel that place where Newman himself knew so intimately, whilst he was a fellow, and the Anglican, he was chaplain to the college, as well, was a really great privilege of having been at Oriel. So I think those two sort of balance each other out, right? The
mhm.
devotional aspect of the Carmelites, Therese of Lisieux, Teresa of Avila, um, and St. John Henry Newman, I think, were great guiding lights for me.
And just to kind of reflect on something else, with your life, it seems like from the very beginning, you were raised in a Catholic family. Did you ever have a moment where you kind of, I don't know, deconverted and then you came back? Or, did you ever have a moment where you doubted, these types of things on your journey?
I think this is the rather odd thing. Speaking to sort of intellectual Catholics, if you like,
Hmm.
both having watched your channel on occasion and speaking to friends here, I feel like I'm quite unique in that I don't really have that kind of a conversion story.
Hmm.
I'm a cradle Catholic through and through, and I think
Right.
in many ways I represent the vast majority of just pew going Catholics in many ways, of course, in a more sort of specialized intellectual way.
Hmm.
Um, but nevertheless, I remember having gradual moments of sanctification and of change, and of becoming more mature in the faith. But never a moment of like a drastic conversion story. So I'm pretty empty in that sense.
Hmm.
My parents sort of raised me. My parents were a little more, Sunday going Catholics, slightly more uh, having a more sort of liberal flavor. I remember going to Sunday Mass, and there'd be guitars, and this would be like a very normal, like Novus Ordo experience.
Mhm.
I personally prefer the traditional liturgy now. I go to daily Mass, so of course things have changed along the way. And I can point to sort of mentor figures that have guided me, but I feel like it's very different from having like a drastic conversion story over like the period of a year or so. I feel like my entire life is a gradual conversion towards God.
Mm. Yeah, that reminds me of N.T. Wright, the former was it bishop, Anglican bishop of Durham. He said something like when people ask him about his life story, he's kind of disappointed because he didn't have he wasn't once in a motorcycle gang. I think that was the example he used. And then he saw Jesus or whatever, had a born again experience. He's just like, no, I just always believed. And I thought it was kind of funny to finally meet somebody else who has a kind of very, let's say, stable faith, right? Because about my life going from Baptist to Catholic and all of that, and even having an agnostic phase while I was Baptist. That's a whole story. But during your time at Oxford, you wrote Saint Cyprian of Carthage, Saint Cyprian of Carthage, ecclesiological interpretation of the Canticle of Canticles. For those of you who don't know that book by its other name, Song of Songs, which garnered high praise. What did you argue in your thesis?
Well, there were a few like very technical arguments about the dating of very specific letters.
Okay.
Epistles 66, 75, 74, and 75, and the common sort of lettering, common sort of numbering of these epistles is a long and fraught question, and I don't claim to have solved it. I just think that I just a close reading of the texts suggests that there were different contexts in which they were written compared to what certain scholars have said. I think the wider sort of trajectory in which the little article that I wrote, the thesis that I wrote for my undergraduate, which is in the process of undergoing review for Vigiliae Christianae, so hopefully, fingers crossed, can be seen in some sort of publication. I'm hoping is the wider trajectory for that, I think, is that older scholars have viewed Saint Cyprian as this sort of very reclusive figure that really wanted to like exclude schismatic sects
Mhm.
from being able to be part of in any way the Church Catholic. And the arguments I think that were raised primarily centered around this like proof text of the Song of Songs.
Mhm.
So Saint Cyprian quotes from the Canticle, the Song of Songs. The proof text, the main ones that he uses are like 4:12 to 15. Uh, my beloved is a garden enclosed, and he takes that, and scholars think that the way he uses that means like the church is like enclosed. It's
Mhm.
completely, closed off to any outside schismatics coming in, and anyone that wants to come back in has to be like rebaptized. So that's like the rebaptism controversy, that catechumens that were received into the Novatianist and the Laxist sects. These were two sort of rival communions that were in Carthage at the time of Saint Cyprian. That they would have to be rebaptized is what Saint Cyprian thought. Now, of course, this is later going to be seen as heretical, and
Mhm.
Saint Augustine is going to come in and say that no, the person doing the sacrament is Christ, and not the church, and therefore so on and so forth. And so, of course, Cyprian, by comparison, looks like he's closing the doors in a little more. I think what I wanted to say is that, well, he does say that, but he does also use the Canticle of Canticles in more liturgically grounded and traditional ways. And one of the ways that he does that is by using the image of a dove. Um, Now, certain scholars, like Carl Schuve was the main one that I was refuting. Actually, a very brilliant scholar, and in many ways a great influence on my own work as well. But the place where I differ is that Schuve says that this is just a purely it's to do with purity, like the dove is like a pure animal, and so on and so forth. But what I wanted to say is that the dove actually does a lot of kissing in both in Cyprian and Cyprian citing the Canticle of Canticles, the kiss of peace, so-called, which is a liturgical term. It's the idea of embracing somebody that's been lost and coming into communion. And so the main point that I think I wanted to make is that it's not an equal. It's often presented that Cyprian is fighting against the Novatians on the far right and the Laxists on the far left, but it's not a very equal field that he's fighting on. In fact, he agrees more with the Laxists progressively than he does with the Novatians, mostly because of the political circumstance where the Laxists are sort of dying out. And so I think that Cyprian should be read as a figure that harkens, in many ways, the Second Vatican Council, as someone that doesn't just open the doors as though it were like a floodgate, to sort of let anyone in and receive Holy Communion, as would be the modern analogy. He's someone that is very moderate in certain areas, but really stands his ground in other areas, and in that I think he can be a great model for like present day ecclesiological dialogue, ecumenical dialogue, as well as like intra-ecclesiological dialogue. And he sort of course, he's the doctor. Well, he's not a doctor of the church officially, but I consider him to be the doctor of ecclesiology. He's the first great ecclesiologist of the West, and for that alone, I think he's very well worth reading in some amount of depth.
If I could spring this on you, a lot of people know about Cyprian of Carthage writing about, the unity of this chair of St. Peter, right? And so I wanted to know, do you have any thoughts on that? I know a lot of people on my channel love the papacy, and so they'd love to hear maybe something about that.
Well, I know that this is somehow closely related to what you're interested in as well, Suan. So what I would say quite simply is that there are two copies, if you like, two manuscript traditions of De Unitate that are sort of floating around, if you like. And there was great controversy, and it was essentially a cross-denominational controversy where Protestants would say one thing and Catholics would say another. And Protestants would like to say that there were two texts, one of which was very clearly pro-Roman. It was very clearly like saying that that Rome has a kind of primacy. It quotes very extensively from and exegetes extensively on Matthew 16:18, to es Petrus et super hanc Petra edificabo ecclesia meam, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. And Cyprian uses that as a way of sort of showing that there needs to be unity both within the See of Carthage, within the local see, within the local diocese, and with the wider communion of the church. And the symbol of that is Peter himself, who is the head of the apostles. And this other manuscript tradition is like, well, it sort of skips that part, if you like. And so Protestant scholars would like to say that, back in the day, I mean, there's a consensus on this now.
Right.
The Protestant scholars used to like to say that this was, a Roman accretion, right? The so-called primacy text. It was a later manuscript tradition, and it was convenient for the times. So someone sitting in Rome or someone sitting after Roman primacy had been developed or established had sort of copied this down and sort of made some mistakes, if you like. But Father Benevo, a Jesuit, actually sort of disproved this and said this quite conclusively, that both were written from the hand of St. Cyprian, just in different modes, different moments in the controversy. At one moment, and it's very technical philological stuff, so I needn't bore your audience with this here. But what I will say is that it does fit in quite well into Cyprian's life. So at a certain moment when he agrees with the Roman, when he's not really thinking about the situation in Rome, he's very happy to have just sort of quoted Matthew 16:18 and exegeted upon it, and Rome is like the symbol of authority in the West, as well as for the wider church, in fact. But as there's a controversy with Pope Saint Stephen, St. Stephen wants to say that you can't rebaptize, right? This is
Right.
the current Orthodox position, right? A Protestant coming in doesn't get rebaptized if he's been baptized validly in the Trinitarian formula. When Cyprian disagrees with that line of reasoning, of course, this is before that orthodoxy has been established, so we can't say that Cyprian was a heretic in any way. But before that that period, after these lines have been established, Cyprian doesn't really want to sort of say that Peter has primacy quite, because he's in disagreement with Stephen, and of course an unfriendly interlocutor could very easily sort of say, look at what you say here,
Right.
So he might have rejigged it, and I think that this is fundamentally a convincing consensus to have reached.
Mm.
And so to any of your like Protestant brethren, or to any Orthodox, I would just say read Saint Cyprian on these points, both in De Lapsis and in some of his epistles, as well as in De Unitate. You find a very robust ecclesiology, which involves Rome as being like the pinnacle of and the judge of what orthodoxy is.
Mm. Well, moving on now to your current studies, I wanted to ask you, why did you choose Harvard Divinity School? And then, second, what have you enjoyed so far about your time in the MTS program, the Master of Theological Studies program, the same one that I'll be going into?
Yeah, I'm very looking forward to when you come, and I'm sure we'll have lots of good conversations like this one. Maybe over a pint then as well.
Yeah, I like the sound
Um,
of that. Mm-hmm.
but I think I was back and forth. Actually, very honestly, I was really back and forth between three options: either staying in Oxford,
Right.
going to Notre Dame, or coming here to Harvard. I was really back and forth between these three, and then eventually I ruled out Oxford because I wanted to sort of escape Oxford for just a little bit of time. Although I knew I'd miss it, and I do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I I think I came to the decision. Firstly, the fellowship certainly helped. It was I was really back and forth before the fellowship came through. I mean, the extra sort of stipend and various things that I get with the fellowship certainly swayed things a little bit. I think that Harvard has a lot to offer Catholics as the as one of the greatest universities, of course, in the country. It has lots of very strong academics. Of course, some that are I won't pretend that there is an ideological slant in the university as a whole. But I think overall, the scholarship here has been largely excellent. I found good people that I could work with across disciplines.
Mm.
And I think that was the thing compared to Oxford that I really yearned for. I'm currently cross-registered, which means that I'm studying in different fields apart from divinity, classics, and also in the art school. So I've been studying some art history as well. And these are like really invaluable tools. I've been really improving my Greek, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
reading St. Maximus the Confessor with a classics professor as well here, which has been a really great privilege to have these sort of one-to-one encounters with this classics professor. Um, and um, and also the art history. So compared to an Oxford master's, which is very narrow, even within the field of
Mm-hmm.
theology, I would have just been basically studying the Church Fathers. Here, I feel like I'm studying the Church Fathers. I'm studying, with Professor Levinson, John Levinson,
Right.
on
Mm-hmm.
in Hebrew Bible and in Jewish studies. I've got my advisor. I think we share an advisor, in fact, Professor Reed. Um, and I've been
Mm.
sort of studying Jewish traditions, Jewish Christian traditions from that angle. Professor Andrew Teeter, who's another Old Testament faculty member, has been really instrumental, and he's been really generous despite his sabbatical year. We've been going back and forth, taking walks, for instance, as well.
Mm.
And this has been a really intimate, really good experience for me, in general. So I think those are some of the like experiences that I've enjoyed as being part of the university. There are certainly challenges, but
Sure.
there would be in any institution.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, comparing an American university to an English to a university in the UK, right? I've heard generally speaking that the difference is that with the UK, right, it's generally speaking very research oriented, focused on a particular subject, and in terms of like cross or interdisciplinary things, it's not quite so much that way. Whereas in the US, I've heard people say that the American universities are generally more well rounded. You don't just focus on one particular thing, but then you're kind of able to push yourself into other different areas, and you get all kinds of different experiences. Would you say that that's been accurate to your experience, or is that too much of a generalization?
Well, I think that I've really had the best of both worlds in many ways.
Sure.
I mean,
Hmm.
Oxford and Harvard are both because of the prestige that they garner, but also because of the great breadth that they cover in very good detail. Um, they're both universities in which both institutions in which they are what you make of them. I think that was the key to when I chose to come here to Harvard. Um, yes, there are various, limitations that might be had here. But I feel like it is really what I've made of it. Back in Oxford, there's of course that stereotype, and structurally that is true as well. That it's more research oriented, that's less interdisciplinary, that it's really focused. Um, Structurally, that's true. I mean, the only tutorials officially that I was given were in the very strict field of theology. And in my second and third years, I chose all of my modules to be historical theology. So
Hmm.
I think I took one paper in Reformation studies, and that was it, right? That was like the one like rogue
Hmm.
later paper. After that was like medieval studies, mysticism in the patristic period, the church fathers, reading the fathers closely, reading the Eastern fathers closely. And that was, I think, a really intimate, really, really close experience, interacting with the so-called tutorial system, being in close contact with some of the leading academics in the world. Um, I think here at Harvard, that hasn't really changed. Especially because in Oxford I was the type of person that would just sit in on classics faculty lectures, that would go to classic seminars. I was in a they do Augustine 3 times in Oxford. They do one for theology, one for classics, and one for ancient history.
Wow.
And I went to all three at times, right? Even though I didn't take the Augustine paper. So um, this is the type of thing that I would do, very similar here, except I feel like it's more recognized in official capacity, which means that I have the opportunity to dedicate more time to it, and it's going towards a grade, so there's more pressure to be able to have that breadth. Um,
Mm. So in terms of your current interests, I think you're still doing work with Cyprian, but I noticed that you mentioned Maximus, and so I'm interested then in why Maximus, and where are you going with Cyprian? Are you still on the same track, or where else is he taking you, or where else are both of these saints taking you?
I've sort of paused on Saint Cyprian for a
Hmm.
little bit because I've become interested, and I'm convinced that there is some sort of a link that I can draw from
Hmm.
Cyprian to Maximus, and eventually to medieval theologians as well.
Hmm.
Um, and I think what we're missing in the West, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, it's relevant, is a sense of sacramentology which was ingrained within our culture, even in realms that are nominally like Protestant, or had that Reformation. It couldn't really shake off some conviction, some deep abiding sense that physical touch and physical association were something that was holy and necessary, and something beyond the sort of rational aspect of us being social animals. Um, and I feel like Maximus captures that in certain ways. Um, some of the things that haven't been really studied as much, even it's hard to find. I don't think there are, in fact, any scholarly translations of Maximus's letters. But I think Father Andrew Louth has done like translations of Epistle 2. It's a very, very famous one about love. and a couple of others. He's been like under translated even, right? So you can see like that there's a gap in the scholarship. I think that in terms of his epistolography, he always has like lengthy, almost formulaic, but not quite discussions about presence versus absence with the recipient. And then he links that somehow to a sense of holiness and also links it to, I mean, the word icon comes up quite a bit. And so it also relates in some peripheral way to the iconoclast controversy as well, because I don't think, as with Brubaker and the sort of Marxist historiography that has sort of tainted the scholarship, I think, I don't think that iconoclasm or iconophilism sort of appears out of nowhere because of an anxiety over invasions or whatever these scholars, materialist scholars, basically want to say. I think that there's a deep sense of continuity with what happened in the past. My research at the moment, and I still haven't quite configured how it will go, will center on something like this. A theology of friendship, if you like, and a theology of letter writing that links intimately to a kind of epistolographical, so like letter writing element that's present throughout time. And I think that ties in for Maximus to something deep and ecclesiological, because it's not separable from the sacramentology at that point. Sacraments, the church, and salvation itself are intimately connected in one linear understanding. It's the entire system that's at stake, and I don't think that we can just sort of isolate one of them and say, aha, we found like a Maximus moment. Maximus reaches all three, and I think that's the reason that I think he's one of the key figures that drives intellectual history in so many ways, and he's so understudied.
So, do you plan on then making this your master's thesis, or will you wait until later to do something like that? Right now, this is just ongoing research. What are your
At
plans
the
with
moment,
this? Mm-hmm.
at the moment, I'm definitely on a research stage. I've been reading
Mm-hmm.
some of his, plowing through some of his corpus. Remember, some of it is very much
Yeah.
untranslated,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's a deep sort of study with the Greek, sort of trying to make my own translations and that type of a thing. So it's very early stages in many ways, but I can definitely see it. I'm hoping to be able to, either over the summer or in fall, to be able to have some sort of a publishable manuscript of sorts, um, and um, and hopefully make this into a doctoral dissertation. I've got
Mm-hmm.
some other sort of side projects happening, such as the Harvard Life. I've
Right.
done one paper on iconoclasm and its relationship to the so-called galactotrophosa icon. It's Mary breastfeeding. It's an icon that originates in Egypt. And so I've got these side projects happening that I'm hoping to sort of get published as well. But my main thread should be, and I, increasingly making it so, is on Saint Maximus, and hopefully I'll be able to make something of a doctoral application out of it. But we'll see how it goes.
Mm-hmm. So, talking about now Harvard life, you
Mm.
started. Father Jeff Lagan? He told me that you started the Ratzinger Society, and so I just want to give you a moment to talk about, what is that society, and what prompted you to start it.
Yeah, I mean, Harvard is as you know, as all readers, all listeners must know, one of the greatest educational institutions around, and yet the Catholic life has been, the churches here, the Catholic Center, forms a great chaplaincy life. But the sort of intellectual vibrancy that I saw back in Oxford, of like Catholic intellectuals sort of being able to express their faith in an intellectual way, I feel like was largely lacking. And several of my friends from Princeton also experienced the same. Like
Mm.
the Catholic life in Princeton is much more intellectually rigorous than here at Harvard. Um, Having discovered this need, we decided to found this Ratzinger Memorial Society. As you say, Father Jeffrey Langen kindly agreed to be our chaplain. He's also my spiritual director privately, so it's a great privilege always to and he delivered a series of lectures for us. And Professor Andrew Teeter, the Old Testament chair here at Harvard, is our faculty member.
Mm.
And the way we've structured it this semester is we've had Augustine reading every other week, and Father Jeffrey Langan gave a talk about the life and legacy of Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI, not quite saint, but soon to be, undoubtedly. And it was a great gathering of Catholic intellectuals across the different Harvard departments, disciplines, and we were able to get together every Saturday morning and read Augustine, listen to Father Jeff give a talk, and so on and so forth. Next semester, we hope to sort of make it larger. We've invited the undergraduate community to come join us as well. So what the graduate community has to offer, we can sort of teach and help out there, and the undergraduate can always bring like a great sense of rigor and vibrancy to the community as well, is our current hope. But it's definitely a work in progress, but it's definitely a great start, I think, to seeing the revival of or at least the start maybe of a rigorous Catholic academic culture on campus, because we boast so many good people, both here at Harvard, Boston College, and come on, it's Harvard. We can definitely invite great speakers from elsewhere. It's just we need the momentum, and it really ought to start, I think, with divinity, because as Saint John Henry Newman writes in The Idea of University, we any Catholic education has to start with and end with theology, which is the queen of the sciences.
Yeah. Also, yeah, Father Jeff Langan. I don't know why I said Lagan. Like, I think I was just overthinking that. But yeah. So, Father Jeff, if you're watching this, I do apologize. But now just to a last few questions I have here on the docket. So, one major, I guess, announcement that you made on Facebook a while back and just around, was that you are going to be working for the Holy Father, Pope Francis, this summer. Now, you wanted to be careful because it's for, right? So it's for the Holy Father, not necessarily with. Maybe you'll run into him, but tell me about that. What are you doing this summer?
Well, I'll be working at the Apostolic Nunciature to the United Nations. So in many ways, it's a double whammy, because I'm able to work very closely with the Holy See, which is a great honor, and something that I've wanted to do for a very long time, and and at the United Nations representing the Church. There are very pressing issues, of course, that faces the Catholic Church and faces our world. And being able to contribute to that, I'll be writing memoranda, undoubtedly, and be assisting the Apostolic Nuncio in his mission and his work. Other than that, I'm told that I'll be trained in the first week that I'm there. So it's I'm definitely going to update your audience on this undoubtedly. But I'll be representing the church in many ways in her teachings, and in all of her teachings, all the way from Laudato Si and the environment,
Right.
all the way to gender ideology, and the church has very clear teachings on this. Persecuted Christians as well, I'm sure, will be another topic, and pursuit of peace in general, I think, will be a great theme that the church historically has, and in many ways the church is the only is in a very unique position to be able to help promote peace on the world stage.
Will you be like speaking in front of anybody, or is it just kind of writing? Well, like, what exactly are your duties?
I'll be writing mostly memoranda was the sort of task
Sure.
that we had to do for our interviews. So I'm sure more of that undoubtedly. And speech writing and clerical work undoubtedly will be part of it. I'm sure in terms of giving actual speeches and things like this to the General Assembly, the types of things that you see on television,
Mhm.
it will be reserved to the
Yeah.
nuncio and his deputies.
That makes sense. All right.
But I'm
Uh,
looking forward very much to working with Archbishop Caccia, His Grace, and the attachés that interviewed me, as well as with the other interns. The interviews were very pleasant, and I'm very much looking forward to working with the people there.
All right, let me kind of maybe do a lightning round here where I'll just kind of, give you the questions and then you run with them. Maybe not a lightning round, but I'll just give them to you in a pack and then I'll let you take them apart as you want. So, first, what are your plans for the future? And not just the immediate future, right? Because we know what you're going to do this summer, but for like the future in the long term. The second thing I have is what is the most mind blowing thing you've learned? And maybe it doesn't have to be just at your time at Harvard, but maybe just in your life so far. All right. So plans for the future, mind blowing thing you've learned, and then what is a surprising fact about you? All right. So those are kind of my three last questions to you. So take them as in whatever order you want.
Well, I'll take them in the order that you asked them.
Sure.
So in terms of things that I want to do in the future, um, it's funny because I came to Harvard thinking that I would try and discern out what I would want to do. In the long run, of course, every Christian's primary vocation is to the sainthood, and
Mhm.
so being able to grow in virtue. I hope I've matured a little bit during my, even during my year here. It's been a lot of change and a lot of pressure in various ways, academic, social, otherwise. And I hope that I've grown in holiness a little bit and hope to do so. In terms of my secondary vocation, now we start already getting into trouble because that was something that I've been hoping to discern for a while, and
Mhm.
it hasn't really been all that clear to me as yet, whether I want to enter the priesthood, whether I want to enter a religious order, or whether I'll find a beautiful young girl that I can see eye to eye with on matters
Mhm.
and raise a good Catholic family with. Those are all worthwhile things to do. And I've it's one of those things that it's still early days to be able to decide. There's a lot of pressure on it, but I'm taking things lightly in many ways. But if there are any interested religious orders or girls out there,
You heard it here.
but I think within my life, I can definitely see myself continuing in academia either way. There are lots of good priest academics that
Mhm.
I know that have mentored me, a lot of lay and married academics that I've gotten to know and that have really mentored me as well. And I've seen beauty and value in all of them. I'm definitely leaning towards like the married life at the moment, seeing some of my mentors with families and little children have been, some of the most delightful encounters I've had with them. So that's definitely something that I see myself doing. Academically, in the long run, I definitely see myself continuing. It's very broad, as you can see, the types of things that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
From the earliest church period, I'm Irenaeus and whatnot. But Cyprian is fairly early. Maximus, fairly late in the patristic era. I would say the close of the patristic era, really, right? I mean, the iconoclast controversy happens after him, but the monothelite controversy is probably the last real Christological controversy. I know, hot take there. The iconoclast controversy also has Christological elements, but
Mhm.
I see it more as an application than as a formulation of doctrine,
Sure.
or
Mhm.
articulation of doctrine. Um, I I'm interested also in like Blessed John Duns Scotus and in like
Mhm.
Newman, so you can see the sort of
Yeah.
this other set of hobbies that I have. So I'd like to keep that breadth ideally. And so academically this will be interesting. Um,
Mhm.
yeah. What were your other questions?
The second one was what's the most mind blowing thing that you've learned in your life? And the last thing is a surprising fact about you.
Those are both interesting. I think that as a cradle Catholic, In terms of the faith, not very much has like blown my mind. I feel like I take, cradles tend to take like greater ownership of their faith, maybe at least than converts, maybe the first few years. And I feel like, I've just sort of, owned the faith to begin with, even when
Sure.
I saw like, the gradual changes, even when I've changed gradually, it's been gradual, and I've sort of feel like I've seen myself as part of these changes. I would say in terms of the faith, seeing the mass said ad orientem was really the
Mm.
first, like, was it wasn't like mind blown as such, as though like but it was like an experientially different, definitely experience. Um this was probably in the place where I saw it done the grandest,
Yeah.
was probably in Norway, when we were doing Osok. This is the traditional Norwegian celebration for King Olav, the first Christian saint, the first Christian king of Norway, sainted pre-canonization period,
Hmm.
medieval saint. But the Catholics get, the Lutherans own the cathedral, but they give the Catholics, stolen property. But they let the Catholics have a mass there once a year on Osok,
Hmm.
on the Feast of Saint Olav. Um, and so because it's this ancient church, we actually use the high altar as opposed to the Lutheran communion table that they've put in front. And that was a beautiful experience. The Bishop of Oslo flew up to Trondheim. Trondheim has its own bishop now,
Hmm.
but back then it was Sede Vacante. The seat
Hmm.
was empty, so we had to fly up the Bishop of Oslo, and he celebrated mass. It was so beautiful, and that was really a mind-blowing moment in many ways. I would say in terms of in general, when my mind was blown, um, the fact that in the US, I always thought growing up
Hmm.
that when people say like I'm gonna mail the check, this was like a figure of speech. In
Oh
the
yeah.
US, you actually like mail checks, and you're sort of expected to like, use checks on a regular basis to pay
Hmm.
rent and things.
Yeah.
This was my mind was just blown when I came and saw this element of the culture. So, there's one more serious thing and one sort of more lighthearted thing there for you.
Hmm. And then one surprising fact about you.
Yeah, I don't know if this would surprise my close friends. But I have a very I have very idiosyncratic views when it comes to theology. I'm
Hmm.
sure I would have sort of disseminated some of that, but I'm often very good at sort of hiding it for PR purposes.
Uh-huh.
Um, I happen to I'm very firmly a believer that Blessed John Duns Scotus should be rehabilitated in many ways
Mm.
in our um in our understanding of tradition. I've got sort of soft voluntarist tendencies that I'm sure we'll be able to debate, discuss.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so on. I think it's to do with his view of the primacy of the will and its connection to like friendships,
Hmm.
and with the previous period in mind, like Maximus the Confessor's like almost obsession with the wills, right? The two wills of Christ versus the one will that was being promulgated by the heretical empire. Um, I think there was the reasoning for it was that the ascetic life and being able to participate and cooperate with the will of God
Hmm.
was paramount to Saint Maximus in Christ, because Christ had to be like this great exemplar that through his will, through his human will, had to cooperate also in the crucifixion.
Hmm.
I think Scotus almost continues that tradition, knowingly or unknowingly. I'm not claiming there's a literary link between them, where he says that the will has to be primary in God, precisely because God is love, and that aspect of the love of God in the Franciscan tradition, I haven't really been able to shake off, despite all of the sort of debates and the vitriol from the the Thomist camp,
Right.
grants of the very age old things. And I think that also influences my conception of friendship.
Mm.
I think that I'm very, very close to some friends. I'm very against certain elements of like a networky culture where you sort of, just get to know people for the sake of knowing them.
Right.
I feel like I want to know people in order to love them and in order to will their good continuously. And in that sense, I always have a very close knit, very small group of friends. And I think that's very deliberate in many ways. And I've articulated almost a theology of that. And that's very private in many ways because I only share it with friends. But I guess it's also open to your audience now as well,
Hmm.
to figure out what are the idiosyncratic views Pius would hold. Hmm.
That's very beautiful. Pius, do you have any questions for me?
Um, I've been watching your channel ever since we encountered. So I'm always very interested in the work that you do. I don't have a question that pops up, but
Sure.
big fan of your channel, big fan of your work. You're doing very well. And yeah, keep showcasing the great depth and breadth of the tradition. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing you soon.
Mm. Thank you, Pius. I remember during the open house at Harvard, what was that, like 2 months ago or something like that? Um, I could only show up for maybe half of it during the day, so I went to some of the opening events and all that. And then I saw you in the lobby the first time I entered in. And it was funny because I recognized you, but you didn't recognize me because, you'd never seen me before. But I had seen like your picture because of the Frank Knox Memorial website. And so you kind of looked surprised a little bit. And then you're like, "Oh, Swan, are we gonna hang out later and have tea?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna be gone by then, because I had to fly back that day." And I remember you had this look on your face of kind of like surprise and just kind of, like, "Oh, dang it, we're not gonna be able to connect." And so I'm happy that at least we have this virtual medium through which we can connect. And I'm excited to be studying with you. You have 1 year left, right, in your MTS?
I have 1 year left. And just on that point, Saint Maximus would be very proud of what you said there, being able to make virtual connections like this.
Hmm.
He did this through letters, and he really articulates almost a theology of letter writing,
Wow.
It's almost as though you're here, Blessed Father, and
Mm,
you're just reading your letters is just like having you here. I often find this with my friends back in Oxford. I often say just hearing your voice, is almost like having you here. But of
mm.
course, this medium of Zoom calls is also something else. So this is always lovely. Yes. This was a great conversation.